It fits in your pocket. A small book, pages, numbers, stamps. Most people carry it without thinking. But this document quietly decides where you can go, where you cannot, and sometimes, where your life is allowed to unfold. It does not speak. It does not explain itself. Yet borders open or close because of what it says. Long before cameras, long before databases, movement was personal. Today, it is administrative. Without this document, you still exist as a human being, but you do not fully exist inside the modern system. This is not a story about travel. It is a story about identity, about permission, and about how freedom slowly became conditional. Before passports, borders already existed. Kingdoms, empires, cities with walls. But identity was not yet a system. People moved with letters, recommendations, personal recognition. You were known because someone knew you. Travel was not equal, but it was human. Merchants moved because they were trusted. Pilgrims moved because faith protected them. Messengers moved because authority stood behind their word. The poor were often stopped. The unwanted were often watched. Movement was regulated, but it was not standardized. There was no global document, no universal format, no single page that followed you everywhere. Identity lived in faces, accents, and reputation. To cross a border was to be seen, not scanned, not verified, not logged. The world was divided, but the human being was still the reference. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world entered an age of movement it had never experienced before. Railways connected cities across entire continents. Steamships crossed oceans on fixed schedules, carrying not hundreds, but millions of people. Between the late 19th century and the First World War, mass migration reshaped entire societies. People left rural villages for industrial cities. Families crossed borders not as travelers, but as workers. Europe, in particular, was no longer a static map of kingdoms. Empires stretched across regions with little concern for borders. And then, suddenly, those empires began to collapse. When the First World War erupted, movement stopped being economic. It became political, dangerous. Borders that once functioned loosely became lines of suspicion. Governments faced a new reality. They were no longer governing people they knew. They were governing populations in motion. Soldiers moved across countries. Refugees fled collapsing fronts. Civilians crossed borders without records, without documentation, and often without destination. At the same time, modern warfare introduced a new fear: espionage, desertion, sabotage from within. States could no longer rely on local recognition or personal trust. Officials needed proof, something portable, something verifiable, something that did not depend on memory or reputation. Before the war, identity was contextual. You were who your community said you were. After the war began, identity had to be demonstrable, written, issued by authority, recognized beyond local borders. This was not an abstract concern. New states were forming as old empires disappeared. Austria-Hungary collapsed. The Ottoman Empire dissolved. Russia was transformed by revolution. Millions of people suddenly existed in territories that had changed names, laws, and rulers. Governments needed a way to determine who belonged, who did not, and who could move. The modern passport did not emerge to encourage exploration. It emerged as a response to chaos, to fear, to uncertainty. It was designed not to celebrate movement, but to manage it. From this moment on, movement would no longer be assumed. It would be recorded, reviewed, approved, or denied. When the war ended, the world did not return to how it was before. Borders were redrawn. New countries appeared on maps. Old identities vanished overnight. Millions of people woke up in places that no longer existed under the same name. And governments faced a question they could no longer ignore. How do you define a person in a world that has been reorganized? In 1920, an international solution emerged. The League of Nations stepped in, not to protect travelers, but to standardize control. For the first time in history, identity was discussed as a format, a document that must look the same, contain the same categories, be readable across borders. This is when the modern passport took its recognizable shape: a booklet, a photograph, a full name, a nationality, a place of birth, physical descriptions. None of these choices were symbolic, they were administrative. The photograph was introduced because names were unreliable. Spellings changed, languages differed, faces did not. Nationality became mandatory because states needed to decide responsibility. If something happens to you abroad, which government answers for you? Place of birth mattered because borders were unstable. Physical traits mattered because forgery was already common. Slowly, the person was broken down into fields. Each field served a function. Together, they created a version of you that could be filed, stamped, and verified. This was a silent transformation. No speeches announced it. No one voted on it. But from this moment on, identity stopped being personal. It became bureaucratic. You were no longer defined by where you lived or who knew you. You were defined by what could be written and confirmed on paper. And most importantly, this identity did not belong to you. It belonged to the state that issued it. The passport was not proof of who you are. It was proof that a government recognizes you as someone it can account for. Without that recognition, movement stopped being possible. Not illegal, impossible. Once identity became a format, movement changed forever. Because the passport did not only describe you, it positioned you. It placed you inside a system that could either open doors or keep them closed. At first, it looked simple: a document, a photograph, a stamp. But over time, the passport became something else. It became a filter. The world began to treat movement not as something a person does naturally, but as something a person is allowed to do. And this is where the passport gained a quiet kind of power. Two people can stand in the same airport, same destination, same ticket, same flight, and still they do not experience the same world. One walks through, the other waits. Not because of character, not because of intention, but because of the document in their hand. The passport looks like a personal object, but it is not personal. It is political, because it carries the weight of the state behind it. When a passport is trusted, it is not the person being trusted. It is the issuing system, the records behind it, the borders it comes from, the agreements connected to it. This is why freedom of movement is never just about movement. It is about recognition, about agreements between governments, about history, about perceived risk. The modern world does not simply ask, "Who are you?" It asks, "Where does the system place you?" And once that placement is made, everything else follows. Visas become requests for permission. Interviews become tests of credibility. Documents become proof that you deserve to move. This is not a moral judgment. It is an administrative logic. States learned to turn uncertainty into procedure, to turn fear into paperwork, and eventually to turn movement into a privilege managed by forms, rules, and approvals. The passport did not just organize travel, it reorganized freedom. Not by announcing new laws, but by changing what the world assumes. Movement used to be a human act. Now, it is a decision made by systems you never meet. And the most powerful part of this system is how normal it feels. Most people grow up believing this is simply how the world works. They do not notice that it is a design, a modern invention, a quiet agreement between governments, and the person in the middle is you. The passport did not stop evolving. It could not, because the modern world kept moving. More flights, more borders, more people crossing. And with movement came the same old fear in new forms. Forgery, identity theft, people traveling under names that were never theirs. The solution, again, was not philosophical. It was technical. And that is how the passport entered the biometric era. A modern passport is no longer just a booklet. It is a document with a digital layer, a chip, data that can be read by machines, a photograph stored in a form that is harder to alter, and in many cases, data connected to unique traits that are difficult to copy. This is the quiet shift. The passport moved from paper into systems, and once identity becomes machine-readable, borders stop being human. They become automated. You do not only show your passport, you pass through a checkpoint designed to compare you to what the system already expects. That expectation is built from databases, from records, from travel history, from patterns. And this is where modern borders begin to feel different. Not because the passport is more powerful, but because the border is more informed. In the past, a passport was checked by eyes. Today, it is checked by infrastructure, cameras, scanners, algorithms that look for mismatch. The question is no longer only, is this document real? The question becomes, does this identity behave as expected? And here, identity becomes more than name and photo. It becomes a trail, a history of entries and exits, a pattern of movement, a profile built quietly over time. This is not science fiction. It is simply what happens when control becomes scalable. When millions cross borders every day, the system cannot rely on human judgment alone. So the passport becomes one layer inside a larger machine. And in that machine, freedom of movement becomes even more conditional, not only on what your passport says, but on what the system has learned about you. The passport still looks like paper, but today it behaves like access, like a key. And like every key, it works only if the lock recognizes it. In the end, a passport does not speak. It does not explain itself. It does not justify anything. It is just a document. Yet somehow, it learned how to define us before we ever had the chance to define ourselves. We carry it in our pockets. We travel with it. We wait because of it. We are questioned because of it. Sometimes, we are reduced to it. Not because it knows who we are, but because it tells the world how it is allowed to see us. And maybe the real question is not which passport you hold, but how much of your life is governed by silent systems you are never invited to question. If this story stayed with you, tell us what other systems, ideas, or assumptions you think deserve to be examined beyond the surface. This channel exists to slow down and look deeper.